I want to tell you about the smallest sound I have ever heard change a room. Not a confession, not a verdict, not the crack of a gavel or the sharp intake of breath when a sentence is read aloud. A single bark. One. From a yellow Labrador in an orange vest, in a residential corridor, on an ordinary Thursday morning. That bark cost a woman $395 she did not have, and it brought her, still in her hospital scrubs, still wearing the exhaustion of a double shift like a second skin, into my courtroom on a gray Tuesday in November, sitting at the defendant's table with a manila folder pressed against her chest, and a 9-year-old girl beside her who could not see the room she was sitting in, but trusted completely that her mother would find a way through it. On the other side of that courtroom sat a man with a laminated business card and a bylaw he had memorized, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that he was right. I have been on this bench for 22 years. I have learned to read a room the way sailors read weather, by feel, by pressure, by the particular quality of silence before something breaks. And I knew, before a single word of testimony was spoken, that what was about to happen in that room was not really about a noise complaint. It was about what we owe each other, about the difference between following a rule and doing what is right, about a mother who had spent 9 years building a life around keeping her daughter safe, and the morning that a system decided to fine her for it. There was something in that file that Richard Pemberton did not know I had already seen, something that would reframe every word he was about to say. And when I finally asked the question that cracked everything open, the room went very still. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories about justice, empathy, and hidden truths move you, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what comes next. There are cases that stay with you the way a scar stays, not because they hurt the most, but because of what they revealed. Not about the law, about us, about the particular kind of cruelty that hides behind clipboards and homeowner association bylaws, and the quiet, devastating confidence of people who have never once been powerless. I have sat on this bench for 22 years. I have seen grief in every shape the human body can hold it. I have watched men confess to things that cost them everything, and women absorb verdicts that should have broken them and didn't. I have learned, slowly, at great cost to my own certainty, that the law is not the same thing as justice. The law is the road. Justice is where you're trying to go. And some mornings when I walk into that courtroom and the docket is already waiting for me, I look at what the system has prepared and I think, we have taken a very long detour. This was one of those mornings. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of morning that arrives apologetically, gray and damp, the sky the color of old dishwater. The heating in the courthouse had been struggling since October, something to do with a contract dispute, which struck me as cosmically appropriate, given what we were about to hear. The radiators hissed and knocked like they were negotiating. The fluorescent light above the clerk's desk flickered every 40 seconds. I know because I counted. I count things when I'm trying not to feel what I'm feeling. I had read the file the night before. I'd read it twice, actually. Then I'd set it down on my kitchen table and gone to pour myself a glass of water and stood at the sink for longer than necessary, looking at nothing. The courtroom filled the way it always does on a Tuesday, slowly, without ceremony, people carrying coffee cups and wet umbrellas and the particular exhaustion of someone who has somewhere else they need to be. The gallery was thin, a few observers. A young law clerk in the back row with a notepad on her knee, and at the defendant's table, already seated when I entered, a woman who looked like she had been awake for 3 days and was only upright through sheer force of will. She was wearing scrubs, blue, the color they get after too many washes, that particular shade of faded that tells you this is not someone who owns many sets. There was a small stain near the left cuff that she'd tried to blot out and hadn't quite managed. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that had made sense at 4 in the morning and had been slowly losing the argument ever since. She sat with her arms crossed over a manila folder pressed against her chest, not like someone protecting evidence, like someone protecting themselves. She didn't look up when I entered. Beside her, so still it took me a moment to register him as something alive, sat a yellow Labrador in an orange vest. He was watching the room with the kind of calm attention that only trained animals and very old judges ever fully achieve. On the other side of the woman, pressed against her right arm, her small hand buried in the woman's sleeve, was a little girl. 9 years old, I knew from the file. Brown hair in 2 braids that didn't quite match. A beige coat a size too large. One pocket mended with thread that was slightly the wrong color. She sat with her face angled upward at nothing in particular, the way people do when they're listening rather than looking. Her eyes were open and still and clear and saw nothing in this room. She was the reason they were here. She was the reason all of it had happened. The letter, the fine, the forms filed in triplicate, the Tuesday morning in a flickering courtroom that smelled of coffee and consequence. I sat down. I straightened my papers. I looked at the man sitting at the opposing table. Pressed gray suit, synthetic leather portfolio, the posture of someone who had never once in his life doubted that he was doing the right thing. That posture, I have learned, is the most dangerous thing you will ever encounter in a courtroom. I looked back at the woman in the faded scrubs. She still hadn't looked up. "We're on the record," I said. The radiator knocked once like punctuation, and I thought, be careful today, because whatever you're about to hear is going to make you feel something, and you are going to need every one of your 22 years to make sure that feeling becomes something useful. The clerk read the case number into the record. Then she read the charge. Disturbance of peace. Violation of Maplewood Commons Homeowner Association Bylaw 14, Section C, Subsection 3. Prohibiting excessive animal noise in shared residential spaces. Fine assessed, $350, plus administrative processing fees of $45, for a total of $395, payable within 30 days of the date of notice. I watched Donna Hutchins while the clerk read. She didn't flinch. She had the stillness of someone who had already flinched at home, alone, and had used up everything she had on that. Now there was nothing left but to sit and absorb it. $395. I want you to understand what that number means when you are an emergency room auxiliary nurse working double shifts at a public hospital. I want you to understand what it means when your checking account has $180 in it, and payday is 2 days away, and your daughter needs new orthopedic insoles for her shoes, and the guide dog's annual veterinary certification is due in 6 weeks. I want you to understand that $395 is not an inconvenience. It is a wall. The representative from Maplewood Commons, Richard Pemberton, 58, the kind of man whose business cards are laminated, stood and delivered his opening statement with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it in the mirror. The animal had caused a disturbance. Multiple residents had been alarmed. The association had a duty to maintain the quality of life for all members of the community. The bylaws were clear. The notice had been properly issued. He said the word properly 3 times. He seemed to find comfort in it. I let him finish. The law on paper was not entirely on Donna Hutchins' side, or at least not obviously. The noise ordinance existed. The bylaw existed. The fine had been issued through the correct procedural channels. Pemberton had his paperwork, and his laminated card, and his $45 in administrative fees. And the system, if you squinted at it from his angle, appeared to be functioning exactly as designed. That is the thing about systems. They function. They process. They generate paperwork and send letters and assess fees and file forms in triplicate. And they do all of this without ever once asking the question that matters. The question that the system is not built to ask. The question that is, in fact, the only question worth asking in any room where one human being is sitting in judgment of another. Why? Pemberton concluded. He straightened his portfolio. He sat down with the satisfaction of a man who believes that preparation is the same thing as being right. I looked at the file in front of me. I looked at the incident report. 2 paragraphs, dated a Thursday morning 6 weeks prior. Animal disturbance in Corridor B, Building 3. 1 bark noted by resident Richard Pemberton. Formal complaint filed same day. Fine notice mailed within 48 hours. 1 bark. I looked at the little girl at the defendant's table. She had turned her face slightly toward the sound of Pemberton's voice while he spoke, the way she turned toward all sound, orienting herself in a room she couldn't see, mapping the world through frequency and tone. Now she was still again, her hand still wrapped in her mother's sleeve, her other hand resting on Biscuit's back. Biscuit had not moved since I entered the room. I set down the incident report. "Ms. Hutchins," I said. She looked up, or rather, her face came up and her eyes met mine, and what was in them was not the thing I most often see at that table, which is fear. What was in them was something closer to exhaustion that has curdled slowly over time into something harder, something that had spent a long time deciding whether or not to still hope and hadn't entirely made up its mind. "I've reviewed the complaint and the association's filing," I said. "I want to give you the opportunity to speak before we go any further." She nodded once, unfolded her arms, set the manila folder on the table in front of her carefully, like it was something fragile, cleared her throat. She started to say something about the bylaw, something about how she had read it after receiving the notice, how she had looked up the federal guidelines, how she had printed out 3 pages from the ADA website and brought them in the folder. I could see her fingers moving toward it, and I held up one hand, gently, not to silence her, to redirect her, because lawyers file papers, bureaucrats cite guidelines. And what I needed from Donna Hutchins in that moment was not a legal argument. She didn't need to win a procedural debate. She needed something this room almost never gives people the chance to do. She needed to be heard. "Ms. Hutchins," I said, and I kept my voice at the temperature I use when I'm trying to tell someone that this room is safer than it looks. "Set the papers aside for a moment." She hesitated. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Neither are you. We have time." She set the folder down. I leaned forward slightly, and I asked her the only question that has ever mattered in 22 years on this bench. Why did this happen? The radiator knocked. The fluorescent light flickered, and Donna Hutchins opened her mouth and the wall came down. She didn't start with the morning of the incident. She started earlier than that, the way people do when the real story has been waiting so long to be told that it can't find its beginning anymore, only the place where the pressure finally became unbearable. She started with the diagnosis. Clara had been 18 months old when the ophthalmologist used the word permanent. Donna told me she had sat in that office for a long time after the doctor left. Not crying, not yet, just sitting in a plastic chair holding her daughter in her lap, looking at the window, thinking about all the things she had assumed without ever realizing she was assuming them. First day of school, learning to drive, reading a menu in a restaurant, the particular pleasure of watching a sunset and knowing the other person sees exactly what you see. She let go of all of those things in that plastic chair, quietly, without anyone watching. Then she went home and learned how to build a different life. By the time Clara was 4, Donna had researched every guide dog organization within 3 states. By the time Clara was 7, she had been on 2 waiting lists for 2 years, submitted letters from 3 physicians, attended 4 orientations, and driven Clara to training sessions on her days off from the hospital, the days that were supposed to be for sleeping. When Biscuit finally arrived, Clara had walked through their apartment, touching every wall with her fingertips, narrating to herself. And then she had knelt down next to him and put both arms around his neck and stayed there for a long time without speaking. Donna told me this and stopped, pressed her lips together, looked at the table. "I didn't rush her. He changed everything," she said finally. "She goes to school. She moves through the building. She walks to the mailbox by herself now." Her voice broke on that last part. By herself. The way it breaks on something that seems small from the outside and is enormous from the inside. I can't explain what that means. To watch your kid do something by herself for the first time and know that she's safe. She looked up at me. He keeps her safe. I nodded. Then she told me about the morning in Corridor B. She had been on her way back from a night shift. 6:45 in the morning, still in her scrubs, Clara beside her, Biscuit in his vest. Richard Pemberton had come around the corner from the stairwell door without speaking, moving quickly, no warning, directly into Clara's path. Biscuit had placed himself between them, and he had barked. Once, a single sharp sound, clear and functional, the canine equivalent of stop. Pemberton had stopped. Clara had not been touched, and Pemberton had filed the complaint before noon. I let the silence sit for a moment after she finished. Let it settle over the room like something physical. The clerk had stopped typing. The law student in the back row had stopped writing. Even the radiator had gone quiet, as though the building itself was listening. Then I turned to Richard Pemberton. He was already straightening in his chair, already preparing the version of events that had served him well in his mirror rehearsal. He began with procedure. He cited the bylaw again, section, subsection, the specific language about excessive animal noise. He said the word community 4 times. He said the word standards twice. He explained that the association had a responsibility to all residents, not just some, and that rules applied equally to everyone, regardless of... Mr. Pemberton, he stopped. Are you aware, I said, of the Americans with Disabilities Act as it applies to service animals in residential housing? A pause. The association's bylaws are subordinate to federal law, I said, which is not a technicality. It is the entire point. I picked up the file. I set it down again. I took off my glasses, held them in one hand, and I looked at Richard Pemberton the way I have looked at people in that chair for 22 years. Not with anger, because anger is easy and costs nothing, but with the full weight of what I needed him to understand. A 9-year-old girl who cannot see was approached without warning by an adult in an enclosed corridor. Her service animal, trained at significant expense by a non-profit organization, certified by the state, legally protected under federal statute, did precisely what he was trained to do. He issued one warning vocalization. 1. The child was not frightened. She was not harmed. She was, in fact, safer in that moment because of that dog than she would have been without him. I paused. You filed a noise complaint. Within the hour. Pemberton's jaw tightened. The bylaws, I said quietly, do not exist in a vacuum, Mr. Pemberton. They exist inside a country that has decided, at the federal level with the full force of law, that a person with a disability has the right to move through her home, to walk down her corridor, to exist in her building without her safety apparatus being treated as an inconvenience to her neighbors. I let that land. Then I picked up my pen. The fine is dismissed, in full. I signed the order without looking up. The administrative fees are dismissed. The HOA will absorb all associated processing costs. I looked up. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the State Housing Authority for a formal review of Maplewood Commons service animal policies. You will be receiving correspondence. I strongly recommend you respond to it with more care than you gave to this. Pemberton opened his mouth. I looked at him. He closed it. I set down my pen and I turned, not to Donna, not yet, but to Clara, who was sitting with her face tilted slightly toward me, the way she always tilted toward sound, and who had been quiet through all of it with a patience that no 9-year-old should have to possess. Clara, I said. Yes, sir, she said immediately, clearly, like she'd been ready. Biscuit did a good job today. She smiled, the full, uncalculated smile of a child who has not yet learned to ration her joy for appropriate moments. He always does, she said. The gavel came down. The sound filled the room, and I sat with it for a moment before I moved. Because there are verdicts you deliver, And then there are verdicts that deliver something back to you. And this was one of the second kind. A reminder, at 65 years old, still necessary, still arriving when I least expected, that the reason we built all of this, the bench, the robe, the gavel, the ceremony, was never to protect procedure. It was to protect her. I have a photograph on my desk. It has been there for 11 months now, tucked into the corner of my blotter where I can see it without looking for it, the way the best things in a life arrange themselves, present without demanding attention. It is a small photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly overexposed the way phone cameras get in bright light. It shows a yellow Labrador sitting in a patch of afternoon sun on what appears to be a school steps. Beside him, cross-legged on the concrete, is a little girl in a red coat with her face turned up toward the warmth. Her eyes are closed. She is smiling the way people smile when they don't know anyone is watching. Donna Hutchins sent it to the courthouse 3 weeks after the hearing. No letter, just the photograph, and on the back, in handwriting that was careful and slightly uneven, 4 words: "He still keeps her safe." I keep it where I can see it because this work has a way of accumulating weight that you don't notice until you do. And on the days when the docket is long and the cases are hard, and the gap between what the law says and what justice requires feels like a canyon I am too old to cross, on those days I look at that photograph. A girl in a red coat, a dog in a patch of sun. 4 words on the back of a piece of paper. It is enough. In the months that followed the hearing, several things happened in the order that things tend to happen when a bureaucracy is forced, against its nature, to reckon with itself. The State Housing Authority opened a formal review of Maplewood Commons within 30 days of my referral. The review found 11 separate instances over 4 years in which the association had issued notices or warnings to residents with documented disabilities regarding their service or emotional support animals. Notices that ranged from the merely misguided to the plainly illegal. The association's legal counsel, I was told, billed them an amount that would have funded Clara's school lunch program for approximately 6 years. I found that quietly satisfying. Richard Pemberton resigned from the HOA board in February. He did not issue a public statement. I did not expect one. Some people arrive at accountability the way you arrive at a town you've been avoiding, quickly, at night, and without stopping long enough to look around. The association sent Donna Hutchins a formal written apology in March. It was 2 paragraphs, carefully worded, almost certainly drafted by the same legal counsel who had just finished billing them into contrition. Donna told me later, through the courthouse coordinator who had stayed in contact with the family, that she had read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, gone to get Clara from school, come home, and then framed it. She hung it in the living room. I thought about that for a long time. The particular defiance of it, the quiet, complete refusal to let the moment be small. She didn't file it away. She didn't throw it out. She put it on her wall in a frame where she and her daughter would walk past it every day. A reminder not of the wound, but of the fact that she had stood in a room and told the truth, and the truth had been enough. That is rarer than it should be. I have spent 22 years watching people bring their truth into courtrooms and have it weighed against procedure and precedent, and the particular indifference of systems that were not built with them in mind. I have seen truth lose. I have signed orders that I believed were legally correct and morally insufficient, and gone home and sat with that distinction until it became something I could carry without it breaking me. This work asks that of you. It asks you to hold the tension between what is and what should be, and to keep showing up anyway. Keep asking the question that matters. Keep remembering that the person at the defendant's table is a person first, and a case number second. Clara Hutchins started a new school year in September. She walks the 3 blocks from their apartment building to the bus stop every morning with Biscuit in his orange vest. And according to Donna, she narrates the route to herself as she goes. The crack in the sidewalk near the pharmacy, the place where the pavement dips before the corner, the mailbox that is always slightly cold. She has memorized her world in a way that most of us never bother to memorize it because we don't have to, because we have the careless luxury of sight. She has mapped it in texture and temperature and sound. Biscuit walks beside her every step. He has not received any further complaints. I think about Clara on mornings like the one she came to my courtroom. Gray mornings, cold radiators, the fluorescent light above the clerk's desk doing its 40-second flicker. I think about what it costs a person to walk into a room where the system is waiting for them, with its forms and its fees and its subordinate clauses, and to sit down anyway, and to hold a manila folder against their chest like a shield, and to still, underneath all of it, hope that someone in that room will ask the right question. I asked it that Tuesday, and she answered. That is all any of us can do in the end. Ask the question that matters, listen to the answer, and then use every tool at your disposal, every statute, every precedent, every ounce of authority this robe represents, to make sure that the answer meant something. The law is the road. Justice is where you're trying to go. Some mornings you get there. If this story stayed with you, stop for just a moment and ask yourself this. Have you ever followed a rule without stopping to ask who it was hurting? Have you ever been the person at the table with the folder pressed to your chest, hoping that someone in the room would ask the right question instead of reading the wrong form? And have you ever watched someone fight quietly, without drama, without anyone noticing, just to give the person they love the right to exist safely in the world? Donna never asked for a courtroom. She asked for a corridor. She asked for a building where her daughter could walk to the mailbox by herself. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. Tell us in the comments what this story brought up for you. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, about the quiet courage of ordinary people, and about justice that remembers why it was built in the first place, subscribe to this channel. The next hearing is already waiting.